Welcome back. So far in our level prototyping, we've been moving around meshes, specifically static meshes. Now, a static mesh is a specific type of asset in Unreal Engine, and we can see those assets in our content drawer here. Now, let's say we moved around in our folder, maybe we went back to our content folder here, and we forgot where that static mesh asset exists in our folder structure. Let's say I have this one selected here, and I don't know where it is in the content folder. Well, I can right-click on that object in the viewport, and I can browse to asset. If I do that, the content drawer will open up to the folder where that asset exists. And it's even highlighted. We have it selected here. Now, notice that the asset says static mesh at the bottom, just under its name. That's telling you the type of asset that it is. So Unreal Engine knows that this is a static mesh. And if we double click on this SM Cube static mesh, then we'll get the static mesh editor. Unreal Engine has a number of different types of editors for the different types of assets. A static mesh can be opened in the static mesh editor, and we can see properties here. Now, Unreal Engine has the capability to store all these properties for a given asset. That's because all Unreal Engine assets have a particular file type. And we can see what that file type is if we go back in the content drawer. And if we right-click on that asset, notice we have lots of options here. One of them is Show in Explorer. If I select that, then my Windows Explorer pops up and shows me where that asset is on my disk. Now, it's really important that you don't go and delete this from here, because this is the actual asset that the Unreal Engine editor is referring to. We see the cube, and notice the other assets in this meshes folder are here. This is that same folder. Notice it's in content. All of the assets in your project will be in your content folder on your machine. Now notice that these don't say .static mesh or .mesh or anything like that. They're .uasset files. And .uasset is the file type that Unreal Engine uses. It's Unreal Engine specific. And .uassets can contain a variety of types of information. Now, as I mentioned, .uasset is specific to Unreal Engine. So if you created a mesh in some other software for modeling, such as Blender or Maya, those programs do not create uassets. Those programs create other file types. It's only once you've imported those files into Unreal Engine that Unreal Engine will automatically generate a uasset for those assets. Now, often when you're creating games, you're going to want things that are a little bit more interesting than basic cubes and cylinders. So how do you get those other assets in, and what types of files are those? Well, when you downloaded the content for this course, you downloaded some assets and placed them on a location on your computer, and you should have a drone folder that has these files in it. One of them is the FBX, and the others are TGA or Targa files. Targas are textures, and we'll talk about those soon. Your icon for your Targa may not be this weird-looking animal head. That's because my machine is set to open Targas with a specific program that I have installed on my machine. It's called GIMP. And that's the icon for it. It doesn't matter. You may see a different icon. The important part is that it's a .tga. But we're not talking about .targa files just yet. We're going to talk about this FBX. Now, a mesh, such as a static mesh, created in some art program like Blender or Maya, can exist in different file types, but the most common you'll be working with for Unreal Engine are .fbx file types. FBX is short for Filmbox, and it's just one file type that can contain mesh data. And we'll learn later that it can contain other data as well. But we're interested in getting an FBX into our project and letting Unreal Engine create the uasset for it. So how do we do that? Well, one way is taking the file in your Explorer and dragging it onto the content drawer. Now, we don't want to drag it just anywhere. We like to keep our projects organized as much as we can. So I'm going to go to Content, and I'm going to make a new folder where I can place this drone asset. Now, later, as we're creating more serious game projects, we're going to structure our content folder with even more discipline. But for now, I'm just going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it Drone. And I'm going to double click the drone folder to go into it. And I'd like to import that drone asset here. .fbx. Now we can do that by clicking Import right here next to Add, and we can find that FBX file on our computer. So I'm going to find where I've saved mine. That's in this Assets folder I created. I'm going to select smdrone.fbx and click on Open. Now, we're importing an FBX into our project. And when we do that, we have a number of options we can choose to specify how to import that asset. Now, we'll go over these in more detail as we progress throughout the course, but you can kind of glance over these options and kind of see what they do. For instance, import uniform scale. It's set to 1, but if I change that to 2, then we're going to import that mesh twice as big. I'm just going to leave everything here at the default settings, and I'm going to click on Import All. Now, the content drawer likes to close up when you do this, but if I open it back up, now we have a couple things here. We have SMDrone, a static mesh, and this is the U asset Unreal Engine has generated upon importing the FBX file. Now notice right next to it we have another file called MDrone. M stands for material. You see, our FBX did not have material information, so Unreal Engine says, well, this mesh has to have some kind of material. We're going to create one automatically, and that is, of course, one of those default options that we left alone in that FBX import menu. Automatically generating a material for a mesh that you import is just a setting, so that's the default behavior. Now we can go to this SMDrone and double click it, and we're now in the static mesh editor for this SMDrone. And just like in the regular viewport, you can click and drag to move around and look around, and that can be useful as you may want to zoom up and get close to the object. I'm going to show you a couple of my favorite ways to maneuver around in this static mesh editor viewport. One is to hold Alt and left click, and we can rotate around the object. And another is to hold Alt and right click, and as I drag up and down, I'm getting closer and farther away from the object. So that's how I typically like to view my assets in the static mesh editor. Now, the static mesh editor, as we learned previously, has a number of properties, and it has its own details panel. Most things in the engine have a details panel. This is where you can see and change details related to any given thing that you have selected. Notice we have a material slots section. This is where the U asset stores the material information. It's that default white material that was generated when we imported this FBX. I'm going to drag out so we can see more of the details panel. We can even click and drag these little lines to drag the left and right sections. And notice that this MDrone material is the default material, and it's a drop-down. We can change it to other materials, and our project has materials in here by default. If you don't see as many options as I do, that may be due to a setting that you can change by clicking on the gear icon next to the search bar, and you can show engine content. This is content that exists in the engine by default. If you uncheck that, now you see less options. So sometimes you'll want that engine content visible if you want to access content in the engine. Sometimes you'll want that unchecked. Now, this material can be set to default with the curved arrow. If I click on that, now we've done away with that white material, and we now just have this world grid material. This should look familiar. Remember when we detached in the Pi session and took a look at the default pawn? The default pawn uses this material. It's just a gray material, nothing special. Generally, if you see that in your level, that means you don't really have any materials assigned, so Unreal Engine gives it that world grid material. But you can always change the material for the static mesh by opening the dropdown and searching. I can search for MDrone and get that white material back that was auto-generated for us. So now we know how to get an FBX file into our editor. Now, I'd like to go back to the Unreal Engine editor and out of this static mesh editor, and I can do that by simply closing it down. I still have the SM Cube static mesh editor open, and if you wanted to keep one of these asset editors open, you don't always have to close it. You can click the tab and undock it and now have a free floating window, and you can always click the tab and dock it up here next to your tab that shows the map that you're on. You can always do that. But I'm done looking at the SM Cube static mesh editor. I'm going to close out of that as well. And now we have our drone static mesh. It's now a U asset in our project. And notice that we have an asterisk next to each of these new assets. That just means they haven't been saved yet. If I were to change to a different level or close the engine, we'd get a pop-up that asks us if we'd like to save all of our unsaved assets. So that asterisk is a good way to remind you that, hey, you need to save. And you can always save everything by clicking on Save All. We'll get a Save Content pop-up, and we can choose which assets we'd like to save. We have changes that we've made to our basic map, and we have these new files, mdrone and smdrone. I can click Save Selected, and the asterisks go away, and now those files are saved. And now that we've done that, we can actually right-click on smdrone, and we can show in Explorer. Before we actually saved this, Show in Explorer was grayed out, but now if we click Show in Explorer, we'll open that drone folder that we placed in the content folder, and we can now see the new UAsset files generated by Unreal Engine. And those contain the data from that FBX and the newly generated material that Unreal Engine itself created. So now that we know how to get FBX files into our project, we're now better equipped to customize our game even further if we get assets from some external source, and those assets will generally come in the form of FBX files. And we now know that importing an FBX will result in Unreal Engine generating a U asset, which has additional information such as the material that Unreal Engine would like to show for that mesh. And just like other static meshes, we can click and drag them into our level. Notice that our drone is quite small. It's a tiny, tiny little drone, but we have it. We do know that we can translate it, rotate it. We can even scale it. If I want to scale all 3 dimensions at the same time, we have the box in the middle that will highlight all 3. We can scale it up that way. Of course, we can scale it in the details panel as well, and we can reset it to its default size as well with the curved arrow. So we know how to get a FBX file into the engine and create a U asset, and even have a default material generated, but this default material is just white. It's very boring, and we do have more files that we can import so that we can make this drone look a little bit more exciting. Remember those Targa files, these .tgas, these are textures. We're going to learn how to get these into the engine as well so that we can spice up the material for this so it's not just white. And we'll do that next. I'll see you soon.